So there's still confusion about testing. Do we all run out and get tested? You said a few minutes ago that the mass testing does not drive the positivity rate up.
Mass testing does.
Mass testing does, okay.
Yeah, the positivity rate is obviously the denominator is the number of tests you perform, and the numerator is the number that tests positive.
Right.
So there's a belief, that the more and more testing you do, that you're going to end up testing a lot of healthy, uninfected people. And so your positivity, the denominator goes up significantly. But if you're not detecting any virus, then the positivity rate's going to come down.
Right.
So,
but then there's the argument that, well, if I'm asymptomatic,
you're going to test positive.
You're going to test positive, and then it...
Right. That's the risk, is that,
right.
Hey, I'm going to go get tested. I feel great, but you end up testing positive.
Right.
That doesn't help the positivity rate, and it doesn't help the daily case rate either.
Right.
So, yeah, it is very confusing. And today, it still remains confusing. Not to add to that confusion, but with respect to the blueprint for a safer economy, opening up, moving through the tier system, unfortunately, the state, the California Department of Public Health, is only counting those tests that are performed on what's called a PCR or molecular platform. PCR stands for polymerase chain reaction. It's not the lateral flow antigen testing. It's more of a testing that has a high sensitivity. It's a continuous testing, constantly looking for the presence of the virus. It tries to detect the DNA of the virus itself, the molecule, as opposed to the protein that sits on top of it. So we have right now 3 PCR platforms: the BD Max, the Abbott ID Now, and the BioFire. We soon will be completed with installing the new Perkin-Elmer PCR platform. Can do 500 tests a day. Very high throughput. It's the same platform that the county runs at their lab in Tulare. It's the same one that the state is deploying to 25 different public health departments. So there's a belief by the California Department of Public Health that PCR tests are more sensitive, more accurate. And in some respects, there's a lot of people that argue yes. Although if you spoke to Randy Coca, our Director of Laboratory Services, and Randy he's a genius when it comes to this stuff. And so Randy would argue with you that, number one, he would say the PCR test is not foolproof. That it's not 100% sensitive. It can miss the presence of the virus and give you a false negative. But it is highly, highly sensitive because it continuously looks for the virus. And it takes about 2 hours to run a test on a PCR platform. But Randy would argue, as would other scientists, in fact, one of the most preeminent molecular biologists in California would argue that the PCR tests and the antigen tests are equally sensitive and are equally reliable. In fact, this molecular biologist conducted a recent study of 900 patients, swabbed them for a PCR test, swabbed them for an antigen test, and there was almost a perfect correlation in terms of both negative and positive. And so Randy and this molecular biologist would argue that antigen testing is just as accurate, and that the state is wrong in taking their position to only accept PCR testing. And so I'm personally trying to, and Randy is, we're trying to push the state, working with our local health department. I've reached out to the California Hospital Association because the problem is PCR testing There are many organizations, many hospitals that don't have those platforms.
Right.
They have to be performed in a certified laboratory. Usually it requires a pharyngeal, nasopharyngeal test or swab. And the testing supplies of PCR have been very scarce. Only recently did we start finally getting some of the Abbott reagents and testing kits coming back. We now have 11,000 of them, but we were down, 2,000-3,000, and we'd limited only to testing our patients and our staff. So to only test or count PCR tests really, I think, is a limiting factor here. Again, the tests that we are doing in the clinics, those are the antigen-based tests. Again, we think they are highly accurate, but unfortunately, we'll still report the results of an antigen test to the county, who will report them to the state through the CalReady system. We have to indicate, was this a PCR test or was it an antigen, and on what platform was done. So that information will feed to the state. They just won't count them towards our positivity rate or the number of daily new cases. So if somebody is healthy but is still worried, or their employer is requiring that they get a test, and if they can't get a PCR test, we'll definitely test anybody that wants to be tested. Call our hotline, go to one of those 3 clinics, and if you want to be tested, we will test you. But we're just going to inform you that the state will not count this test. We'll talk to you about our reliability of it, our belief in it, but there's a risk that you could have a false negative. But again, that's a risk with both PCR and antigen. There's just a belief that the antigen-based test has a higher risk of producing a false negative.
And several of you have gone to, I believe, our Exeter clinics and our Dinuba clinics, and you have sent me feedback, which I give to our team. And so thank you for both the positive and the negative feedback, because that's the only way our team really knows what the community is seeing when you're giving feedback about signage or multiple phone calls. Thank you for sending that to us, because then we're able to change those practices and help you out. So just very interesting, though, that we now have all of those testing supplies in the state. We can't use them to even help our county get to the next tier.
Right. Yeah, and again, that will continue to change. When this Perkin-Elmer PCR platform is in place, and we're actually we're constructing a laboratory right now in our blue room. It's down in our basement in the medical center here. It's kind of one of our largest conference room. It's where our board normally meets, and right now it's being used as kind of a respite area for our staff to go down there and be spread out. There's a television and where they can have, take a break, have lunch, and so in a corner of that room we are constructing an area that will house the Perkin-Elmer laboratory equipment, and it's just down the hallway from our primary laboratory. But once that's installed, again, high throughput, 500 tests a day, an unlimited supply of reagents and testing kits that you very well could see that becomes now the standard that we test everybody, including healthy people, that we can run it on that platform. We're probably still, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 weeks away from having that in place. But we'll continue to use the Quidel platform. I think the thing, that's where the confusion and the frustration is. That is the platform that the state sent to all the nursing homes in California to test nursing home residents and nursing home employees every week to make certain they were COVID-free. So it was good enough for the state to send to our nursing homes. It also, the federal government just shipped 150 million of the new Abbott Binex now antigen-based tests shipped 150 million. They're the little AG cards that I talked about, where you just a nair swab, you rub it on the card, it mixes with the reagent, you get results in 15 minutes, it costs $5. So the federal government just shipped 150 million of them across the country. And neither of those, neither the Abbott Binex Now or the Quidel that the state shipped, will be counted. The results won't be counted by the state in terms of the metrics. So
Is it just California, or are other states taking the same stance?
I don't know definitively. My understanding, it's California only, although there may be a handful of other states, but I'm not aware of any.